Hello and welcome to the Reformed Rogue reading of The Climax of Civilisation by Moylan Walsh. We are picking up where we left off with Chapter 1. The Nature of Civilization. Politeness, urbanity, civility are terms taken from life in cities. They refer to the effects of such life upon manners in their refinement. But the original thing is crowded existence on a fixed spot. To live in that condition is to live in a civil state. Civilization means making civil, or it refers to the condition of being civil, in both the senses of living in a crowded state and of living in a refined state. It has been well defined as the art of living together in close relations. Among the animate creation, certain insects, bees and ants, satisfy the first requirement of living close together, but not the second, as they act by instinct. Some birds, fishes, and herbivorous quadrupeds nearly reach, but fall short of, the first requirement, because, though living in flocks, shoals, and herds, they must wander in quest of food. Man, as a brute, is a predatory species, and can obtain sustenance only with much room around him. Such is savagery, sparsely occupying large territory. Civilization is its opposite. Barbarism, a mean term. For mankind to be able to live crowded close is needed a varied exercise of intelligence, directed toward combination. They must work in unison. They must aid and protect one another. They must enter into mutual agreements. They must assume the rights, the duties of command and obedience. They must respect one another's rights. Accordingly, the means and the consequences of crowded existence in a definite area are usually added to the notion of civilization. Politeness is both an effect of such living together and a prerequisite of its continuance. Civilization includes even more than mere refinement, extending to the system of managing society or the friendly intercourse of human beings, first brought under conscious regulation by citizens, civis, in a city-state, civitas, along with the security of person and property and the general welfare which ensue. The purpose of civilization is right living and happy living, and these ends are so much more important that their manifestations monopolize our attention and have received a prominent place in the definition where, in strictness, they do not belong. To most of us, the meaning conveyed by the word is that of a high, in distinction from a low, state of order and prosperity, while the more scientifically minded have turned to the other side and spoken of civilization as our command over the powers of nature or our knowledge of the arts, though the former of these is a consequence of the latter, and this of our possession of the sciences. An advantage of connoting these characteristics in the idea of civilization is that its gradation is measurable more readily by the amount of prosperity, which is its phenomenal effect, and by the extent of command over nature, which is its obvious cause, than by any degrees of being civil or united in a social state. Some have also treated civilization as an approach towards justice, which indeed perfects the art of living close together. But this is not complete. For we can think of a barbarous tribe becoming truly just without any great improvement in its material condition, and we should not consider it highly civilized. Civilization involves material prosperity as well as moral advance, being imperfect without either. In this subject, for the student of the means of making advancement, the precedents or causes of civilization are far the most significant. It is not enough to conceive of civilization as dependent upon man's control of nature. We must include the nature itself, which is brought under our control, as there is a great difference between nature on the ocean and on land, in the tropics and in cold regions, where the soil is barren and where it is prolific. Better may civilization be said to depend on man's control of nature's forces and materials, for it depends as much on nature's supplies as on our own use of them. The extent of nature's gifts must be taken into consideration, as well as the extent of our ability to take advantage of them. This, our ability itself, depends on our knowledge of nature's laws or science. The two great factors of civilization, therefore, are this knowledge and the sources of supplies provided by nature. Each of these factors is essential. The largest and most fertile country in the world would not itself bring forth civilization without science and without the arts by which science is applied, and the science and arts of all the academics would not beget civilization on an isolated coral reef. There are, in other words, both a moral basis of civilization and a physical. Science itself depends on the interaction of intelligent beings working together, and on this also depends the use of nature's materials. This use requires appropriation of nature's sources by men in common, which again is collaboration in the management of a territory. Collaboration, then, is the beginning of all civilization. It requires the coming together of human beings. This coming together is not civilization. It is as yet only association, or the formation of society. Society is the basis of civilization, just as the existence which is possible in a crowded state or under some well-regulated government is civilization itself. For this, the fitting together of the parts into a whole is necessary, which condition, being comparable with that of the organs in a living body, is called organization. Civilization is organic. A civilized state is an organism. To such coming together, or congregation, and organization, there are limits. People must congregate in various combinations. Hence, mankind is divided into many societies or countries, whose degrees and stages of civilization may be different. As they borrow from one another, the civilization of neighboring societies are generally pretty much alike. The prominent differences occurring over great distances or beyond impassable barriers. Such is a static conception of civilization. Dynamically, civilization must be considered as a continuous series of states or conditions of a society in different degrees of adaptedness of organization, in different degrees of power over nature, in different degrees of prosperity. Starting from its negation in savagery or barbarism, civilization grows, or rather, a society grows in adaptedness of organization, in power over nature, in prosperity, and thus bears its civilization along with it. Such growth is improvement of condition, or progress. Progress itself is not identical with civilization, as has sometimes been said. For civilization may exist at any moment and over any period. It may be stationary and even retrograde. But civilization never being perfect, its progress is always desirable. For this, after a certain small advance was made, another growth was necessary, growth in size. For in the beginning the congregations of peoples were very restricted, owing to the slow movement of persons who have only their own legs to carry them and who have to push through the removed obstacles of nature. But as paths are cut and enlarged into roads, and other means of transport and carriage are employed, the congregations become larger. At first, also, the differing congregations, being few and far between, and consuming the substance where they lived, moved slowly about over the earth, or kept a wide area to themselves, in which they roamed from place to place. Such was the tribal stage of human societies, not yet civilized. But as the earth became more fully occupied and the room for roaming was contracted, the tribes became stationary. And now several tribes uniting the same center at the same center formed there a city, which with its surrounding territory constituted a city-state. Later, the means of communications improving, so many united that they formed several cities, all in one combination, constituting what is simply called a state, or country, or nation. States so formed have ever grown larger and larger with improvements in communication between their parts. For, thus it has been put in terms of science, the size of states which is most successful is a function of internal communication. One reason why such quantitative enlargement is necessary for qualitative improvement in civilization, which is the main thing, is that collaboration on a large scale gives greater command over nature, as may be appropriate, as it may appropriate or bring under common management more sources and bring together more materials and accumulate more forces and apply them better. Another reason is owing to the existence of neighboring states. For the largest state, if also the strongest, may get for its own use some of the produce of the others, or may control and direct the labor of their peoples for its own benefit, and may also save itself from being so exploited by others. The power of one man or state over another or others is an increase of the power over nature of that man or state. For advance in civilization has rested on something else than collaboration, at least than friendly collaboration. Friendly collaboration is the beginning of civilization, and during all the advance of civilization, it remains one of its factors. But there is another factor, which is the exact opposite as regards the accompanying feelings. This is strife, contention, competition. In the beginning, collaboration was almost only between individuals in a society, and the societies were in almost constant warfare. Later, later, the societies came to see their interest in uniting, and even when not coalescing, have helped one another and worked together. But strife and contention have raged also within societies, and when friendliness became common between societies, it is more within than between them that dissension has been constant. One fighter, whether an individual or a state, may subdue another, subjugate, enslave that other, compel that other to join forces with those already employed. Thus, strife may cause involuntary collaboration, as in slave gangs, and in this way contribute to the advancement of material civilization. But its greatest influence is apart from collaboration. It serves the purpose of spurring on to greater effort, not only by the sentiment of emulation, because of the dislike of being surpassed, but by the actual need of exerting all one's energies to avoid being subdued. Also, it kills off those who lag too far behind, sometimes directly, generally, at least indirectly, and as those who have it in them to strive hard are more likely to produce offspring like them. This survival of the fittest in the struggle for existence brings about a natural selection, whereby the fittest parents are left over to produce the fittest children. Strife is thus the weeder out of the weak and unfit. Of these two factors of civilization, collaboration or the faculty of sociableness on which it depends is absolutely necessary. Without it, civilization could not start, nor advance, nor continue. Without it, our civilization would cease. strife or the strife or the spirit of contention, especially in the form of seeking one's own advantage at the expense of others, does not seem so essentially necessary, and looks as if it might be dispensed with, at least within the social groups, if not between them. But in our world, things seem to be so arranged, and in the past it is difficult to see how civilization could have been brought forth from non civilization without strife both within the groups and between them. At all events, such has been the course of things. Without any strife at all, it is true, a perfect civilization, once somehow attained and universally disseminated throughout the world, or in an absolutely isolated region, might continue, simply by the good fellowship of all its members. But where such perfection of civilization is absent, some elements of savagery still exist, and selfishness and cruelty exert themselves through violence and deceit. The mere friendliness of good individuals in the society cannot eradicate these bad qualities from others. It is therefore somewhat consolatory to know that the contention which these qualities arouse itself contributes to the advancement of the race. Advance has, indeed, almost always been made by some few getting ahead of the rest, and by the rest following along, slowly behind, many lagging, some not even moving at all. Those who have gone ahead have done so in two ways, either by making some positive discovery or invention, by which old wants may be more easily satisfied and new wants created and indulged, or by seizing to themselves through force or fraud some of the goods produced by others. Thus some have risen by climbing, perhaps by being boosted, and have pulled others up after them. Others have risen by mounting upon the shoulders of their fellow men, pushing them, or at least keeping them, down. Often those who have done the former have employed their increase of power to do the latter. These exceptional men became rulers, found families, and oppressed the others by reducing them to slavery, which is subserviency entirely for the benefit of the rulers, or by making them into subjects, in a subserviency only partly for the benefit of the rulers and partly for the benefit of the ruled, and sometimes pretending to be wholly for their benefit. From slaves they exact service, from subjects tribute. And what is done by individuals within a community may be done by one community among other communities. It may forge ahead of the rest by the superior qualities of its citizens, and by the resources which their qualities and the nature of the land they inhabit put into their hands, and so many conquer their neighbors, and either in whole or in part may exterminate them in order to occupy their land, to reduce them either to slavery or to the state of subjects. The conflict, both within communities and between them, may be long and stubborn, and generally the very qualities and lead to obtaining from nature the means by which victory is won. A result is the production of classes within a community, and of subordinate communities within a large state. This differentiation of individuals by contention has been a universal precedent on our earth of their organization by which collaboration is again obtained. Collaboration is now not of equals, working every one under his own guidance, as wise as any other, a kind of cooperation which can succeed only when all individuals become perfectly wise. It is of unequals, in which some lead and guide, and others to do what they are told, and some merely transmit orders. There is multiform complexity, as in the organism of plants and animals. Individuals in a state are like the cells in a living body, and in the state its members or organs are classes, orders, local communities, contractual combinations, or corporations. These develop and their relations change, and those which change for the best subdue others and survive till still others subdue them. In short, as we have seen, a civilized state is a growing organism, and the advance of civilization is this growth. As such, a civilized state is subject to the fate of all growing organisms in plant and animal life. It is subject to decay. For everywhere, growth involves a highest point or stage, which may be occupied for a shorter or longer period, but beyond which the internal principle of growth cannot carry, after which the opposite process of a disintegration sets in. The civilization of every state, or of every cluster of states, therefore, forms a cycle, having an ascending movement, a continuance on a highest plane, a gradual descent into lastly, a lethargic condition from which, if it be again awakened, it will arise to run a new cycle, or else may stagger on in an indefinite decrepitude. And between all such cycles of civilization, there are resemblances, as there are resemblances between the growth and decay of all living bodies, there being common causes for the expansion and common causes for the contraction of civilization, and also for the passing of the former causes into the latter, though their particular manifestations may be different in different civilizations and lead to different results. This cyclical theory of civilization has been long and widely entertained. In antiquity, it was held mostly in an astronomical form, when it was found that after certain centuries and millenniums, the sun and moon, and then all the planets, reverted to the same positions. Wherefore, as the stars were supposed to influence the earth, it was believed that human affairs would return to the starting point in the golden age of innocence, and again run similar, if not identically the same courses. That theory was one of the errors of the ancients, but even then the late Roman historian, Florus, recognized the analogy between his country's development and the decay, and between his country's development and decay and the life of man. Rome, he said, under the kings was in its childhood, then, till the first Punic War in its youth, in its mature manhood till Augustus, after which it entered in its old age or dotage, though still, when he wrote, a hell and hearty one. In modern times, this physiological theory of cycles is better known. It is, however, sometimes perverted by being applied to all humanity in the course of the world. All humanity does not form an organism, and so cannot run the course of an organism. Whatever be the advance of civilization in all the world, it is different. Only states are organisms, and only the civilization of states, individually or in groups, can have the regular evolution and involution that are peculiar to living beings. Many states also have been subject to misfortune, so common to plants and animals, of being cut off in mid-career. Those which have been permitted to run their full course have always ended in senility. The way Florus represented the case is not in agreement with the division here made. The Roman doctrine of the four ages of man was lopsided, having two ascending periods, one culminating period, and one descending period. Better is the conception of one ascending period, followed by a stationary period at the top, and then a descending period, followed by another stationary period at the bottom. St. Simon divided the cycles into two periods only, which he described as the organic or synthetic, corresponding to what is here called the ascending, and as the critical or analytic, corresponding to here what is called the descending. He overlooked the stationary periods which succeeded to these periods of change. Adam Smith had previously spoken of three stages, which he designated as the progressive, the stationary, and the declining. Two of these have given the hint to the division here made, but he omitted to take into consideration the other stationary period, which ensues as a fourth, and from which, therefore, the second needs a distinctive name. The theory, of course, has also been denied. Some have held it of past civilizations and of the modern up to the period of maturity at present, but have refused to admit that old age is fated to follow. Or they believe that a new period is already entering, in which mankind shall reach its goal and stay there. These have generally combined it with the error just mentioned of treating humanity as a single thing. Others have rejected it altogether, and in its place have substituted a theory of gradual development, not without relapses, but nevertheless with continual progress to ever improving conditions. The indefinite perfectibility of man was, at the end of the 18th century, a popular French doctrine, fervently advocated by Condorcet, and taken up in England by Godwin. This is now replaced by a theory of the definite perfectibility of man's institutions, which is believed to be the imminent and about to form an entirely new era. Of this theory there will be more to say later, and soon we shall see the amount of truth in it. At present, let it only be remarked that if the theory of a single progressive moment of humanity were true, there could be no science of history and no foresight into the future, since science must have a multiplicity of repeated instances from which to draw its generalizations. But according to this theory, every step ahead is into something new and without precedent in the past or elsewhere. Only in the cyclical theory are similar instances provided already at hand, by which we may learn the general course of civilization, and in whatever position we find ourselves, be able to draw inferences about the future. Perhaps even so, we have not instances enough to provide us with exact science, yet we may acquire a sufficient abundance uh, yet we may acquire a sufficient abundance to permit of forming a body of probable inferences, such as used to pass under the name philosophy of history. This theory, however, must rest on stronger ground than the mere service it may render, and its strong basis is indeed fixed in experience, for we have historic information about at least two grand cycles of civilization preceding the one in which, of course, we find ourselves, and the one in which we find ourselves bears so much resemblance in its beginnings to the beginnings of those two other cycles that we have good reason to believe its further course will somewhat resemble theirs. Those two are, first, the contemporaneous riverine civilization, riverine civilizations, or civilizations of the fields and meadows, where communication was easy, which existed for a couple thousand years or more prior to the 8th and 7th centuries BC in the Nile Valley and in Mesopotamia. Of the Egyptians on the one hand, and on the other of the Chaldeans and Babylonians and Assyrians, these being followed for a few centuries more by the hill civilizations of the Medes and the Persians, who, however, came down into the plains and took up the civilization of the peoples they conquered, while in the midst of them all, the Hebrews remained in their hills till they were overrun and dispersed. And secondly, the Mediterranean civilizations of the Phoenicians and the Greeks and the Romans, the last continuing 1,000 years, the former two preceding and the Greek surviving it, the Roman ending in the so-called Dark Ages, which were spanned by a desert civilization, fervid and blasting like its habitat, of the Arabs, till after a minor cycle in the city-states of northern Italy and western Germany, for there may be such eddies in all great currents, our modern and oceanic European and American civilization grew up. Back of the very first of all these historic cycles was probably another period of considerably greater length, but of considerably inferior civilization, perhaps not yet deserving the name, about which we have knowledge obtainable only from its scattered remains, and too imperfect to inform us whether it was broken into more than one cycle, such as a Stone Age of savagery followed by a Bronze Age of barbarism. The cycles which we are acquainted with have proceeded, in spite of some back currents, from the east to the west. Further east there were and are other civilizations in India and China, the civilization in the one having been subject to many vicissitudes, while that in the other has been more steady than anywhere else on earth. These are so different from ours, and so imperfectly understood, that they yield us, as yet, but little instruction. And the other line of succession, unfortunately, the two earliest civilizations have left inadequate information about themselves to afford us much help in the inductive study of history. Only in their general outlines do they show us the cyclic stages, most clearly exhibited in entirety by the Greco-Roman cycle, and in its beginnings by our own. The Greco-Roman or classic civilization is therefore the great precedent upon which we must rely. The present work can make no attempt to prove this theory by a detailed examination and comparison of all the known civilizations, which would require an encyclopedic history of the world. It will proceed at once to make use of it, and to sketch in general outline a typical cycle, as may be learnt from those whose history we are most fully acquainted.